What is going on, my fellow Summit Chasers? I realized as I was putting on that countdown that I'm mostly using it as a just a way to buy time. I think that's mostly what it is. I do like it. I like the it pumps me up. The music it gets me in the mood, but I also am using it a little bit because I am procrastinating a little bit. But very excited for this morning. I have a good friend of mine, former client, now a good friend of mine, Mr. Steve Overby, but I'm going to let him do most of the introductions to himself. But really quickly, a few house cleaning things. This Tuesday on our Founders Focus, we're going to be continuing our conversation around the Map Your Path pillar for our strategy session. How do you create a coherent, and what are the foundations of a coherent, successful business strategy? There's a lot of noise out there. And if you caught our last week's episode, we had one of our Summit Chaser team members on the show, Mr. Paco, and we broke down the difference between good and bad strategy, particularly focusing on what constitutes bad strategy and how do you identify if you do have a bad strategy and why that holds a lot of businesses back. It holds a lot of people back. So you think any type of success takes steps. It takes coherent actions to what was in essence a that would good and so kind of spot this one, and the internet, the regular internet, isn't that good. So we actually have our Starlink up, and it works so good. There's not like a middle ground really, but it's going to come back all good when Elon Musk shoots up a couple more satellites in a few minutes. I'm sure it will be fine. But really, so we're going to be around strategy and what successful, at least higher chance of success in strategy. And then Thursday, we are going to have it's going to be a really special episode. We're going to have multiple guests on that day. So we're going to be actually bringing on a few of the speakers from our Young Professionals Leadership Summit that's going to be taking place October 19th in Toronto, Ontario. So we're excited to have a few of the guest speakers on that show. We're going to be through some about type of time you want us to cover during the event itself on leadership. On do you want to move into that leadership role? If you do, what is that? Your what are challenges? Maybe you don't even know them up. You want to have up to that third. Well, welcome. Excited. He's a human father, husband, and
I'm doing great. I'm not hearing you very well though. You're kind of bouncing in and out. I have to admit. You kind of.
My Starlink is not doing great this morning, but that's okay. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and I'll get it figured out?
Yeah, no, not a problem. So, yeah, really great to be here, Zach. I appreciate you inviting me. So my name's Steve Overby. I currently live in the great state of Alabama, but I'm originally from Montana. I've spent a little bit of time in both doing military and civilian work. Found myself, I'm a West Point graduate. West Point led me to, everyone says, well, how do you get to Alabama from Montana? I tell people I lost a bet, but my wife's family doesn't think that's very funny. But I went to Army Flight School. That's where I met my wife. Army Flight School is in Alabama. And then I spent about almost 8 years active, not quite. I was an active duty aviation officer. Spent quite a bit of time in what they call air assault units, 101st Airborne Division, 2nd Infantry Division, things like that. All that was before 9/11 kicked off. So the military was quite different back in the late 90s. So, you know, I before 9/11 got out, I decided after almost 8 years it was time for me to go. So I got out of the military, started working in the civilian world. Almost all my civilian experience has been in some sort of sales, revenue development, whatever. Worked in pharmaceutical industry for big pharma, worked for some consulting companies in DC, but again on the revenue side, not on like the consultant side. Um, and then somehow I found myself after being out for 10 years getting kind of pulled into the National Guard. So I got into the Alabama National Guard around 2010. Um, and then have kind of that also pulled me back into kind of the government contracting space. So I started
Mhm.
working government contracting jobs again in the revenue side, so business development jobs and government contracting. Um, since then, I've had various jobs in the National Guard. I've done everything from been deployed a couple times and going overseas for various things. I was a public affairs officer for different groups. I've been inspector general for just a couple different groups. I'm currently a colonel.
Mhm.
Just finished the Army War College, which is a strategy school, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, so I spent 2 years doing strategy stuff for the Army, and then kind of trying to figure out what's next for me in the Army. I'm getting kind of long in the tooth, as most people. If I would have stayed active duty, I could have retired at 41. I'll be 54 this year, so I'm a little bit I'm a little bit older than most that are at kind of my peer group. But that's what you get for taking 10 years off. And then in the civilian world, I've worked for several different groups. I worked for Booz Allen for quite a long time. And then I worked for a nonprofit called National Industries for the Blind.
Mhm.
And then most recently, I help run. I'm the vice president of business development and help run a small 8A Alaska Native Corporation that we
Mhm.
do government contracting. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Still live in Alabama. Still have a couple kids. My daughter's going to be 27 this year, so
Time
they're not
flies.
little. my
Time
my
flies.
my son turns 18 next week, and he's a senior in high school and um, big player on his football team. So I mean, big. He's like 280, so he's a big kid. Um,
He's literally big. I remember when we
yeah,
met, he was just getting into football,
yeah, he just
or just
started.
maybe just getting serious about it.
Well, he was a baseball player forever, and
Mm.
really loved baseball, and it was all anybody who's been kind of in the baseball world. It's all travel ball and this, that, and other thing. It's
Mm.
He was in that for years and years, and then as you start to get bigger, all of a sudden, start getting over 240, stuff like that. You don't people like unless you're going to play first base, then no one sees you as a third baseman anymore or a pitcher. So,
Mhm.
and he started playing football really because one of his baseball coaches helped coach football too, and kind of asked him to
Mm.
come out and started
Mm.
really loving that. So, yeah, he loves. He's
Now
a
he's
team
like
captain right now.
he's been getting
Yeah.
eyes like to go to college and that kind of stuff too, huh?
Yeah, he's got a couple smaller schools that have, well, he's got quite a few smaller schools, like in the, D2, D3, some
Mm.
small Division 1 schools. That if you're a lineman and you're not over 6'3", then, to get a big D1 scholarship is,
Yeah.
they don't, and he's supposed to be 6'3", but he's only about 6 foot, 6'1" right now. So, but I think there's good and bad to that too. I think there's, if you're ready to go to a big D1 program, great. If
Mhm.
you may not know that that's for you. I have a couple friends
Mm.
who their kids play at the D1 level and they thought it would be great, and they really don't like it right now. They're pretty
Mm.
disappointed. They're thinking about quitting because it's a job. It's a
Yeah.
serious full time. That's your gig. And my
Mhm.
son's out goose hunting right now, so you'll probably hear him walk in a minute because the minute he walks in, the dogs will go crazy. But
So
there's
cool.
that part of him that you know if he could get a scholarship to go goose hunting, then he'd probably do that. So um, so, yeah, so we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
it's neat to have interest, and
Yeah.
that you're a professional athlete, so it's cool to when someone calls you up and says, "Hey, we'd like you to come here," and
Mhm.
every day he's get different emails from schools about, "Would you like to come for a visit?" and this, that, and other thing. That's a that's a good thing to do and feel when you're 17, 18 years old, right? That
Yeah,
someone
and
sees your skill
options are
set,
so nice. Options are so
right?
nice, right? Like,
Well,
go ahead.
and I always encourage them to like, listen, put yourself in a situation where you make the choice. Don't let someone else choose for you.
Mhm. Yeah.
If you want to go
Mhm.
do something, at least be in a position where, hey, if I want to, I can go do it.
Yeah.
So we'll
Mhm.
see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's still
Yeah.
so cool though. You feel proud? It's
Oh
a
Lord.
proud dad thing to talk about. So I want to kind of wanted to bolster you up a little bit.
Well, I think It's weird because my daughter's 27, and my daughter was quite successful as too, but in a
Yeah.
different world. So, I mean, my daughter was a
Yeah.
dancer and like on
Mm. Oh
ballet
yeah.
companies and stuff. My daughter was a cheerleader for the New Orleans Saints, and then decided, well, I'm going to try and win Miss Mississippi USA pageant, and she did. And so she went to Miss USA and all these things, and I don't know, it's different. I talked to my kids about it. I'm like, it's different to see your daughter win Miss USA and watch your son hit a home run to win a baseball game. It's a two totally different emotions, but they're
Yeah.
you know, you're both it's super proud emotion, but it's like it's totally it's
Yeah.
in a different, watching
Yeah.
my
That's
son get a
wild.
sack or something, he sacks the quarterback or something. It's a totally different emotion than watching my daughter win a dance competition, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you also, I'm assuming, maybe I don't, maybe you're a dancer and I don't know it. You
No.
also know more about, you understand the emotion and you understand, it's more relatable for, especially for dads, right? Men in general, probably when you see your son in a sport, maybe a little bit.
Well, part of it is, but crazy is like I never played baseball. So when he was
Yeah.
playing baseball forever, I had to learn baseball. I didn't know. I mean, because I grew up in Montana, we didn't really play it.
Oh,
Now
baseball.
there's some.
Yeah.
Now there's better high school leagues and stuff. But where I grew up, there weren't enough people to play baseball. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in my third grade class I had 8 people. So
Mhm.
it was hard to get a baseball team together.
Mhm.
But so there was part of that. And I learned a lot about. Now I played football and everything, so
Yeah.
that's a different emotion. But I'll be honest, we have a there's a big break between my kids. There's like 9 years between my kids.
Mhm.
But when I was I was full in. I mean, when I went all in for whatever my daughter did. So like when she was on in a ballet company, I was actually on the board of directors in the ballet company.
Oh, you're that
So
bad. Good for you.
yeah, so like I'd go to their practices and learn, and like I don't understand a thing about what you're doing. I don't know why your feet should be in this position and not that one, but I learned. You know, Now it's like you don't want me to go. Now I'll go to a dance competition. I'm like, yeah, I don't like the way that girl's feet look. They should have put pointed wrong. Like, how do you know anything
Oh,
about dance? And I was like,
judgmental.
my daughter's a pretty good dancer. It's kind of a good. It's funny because my wife and I've been together now. What year is it? 2024. My wife and I've been together 30 years. So
Good for
we
you
got
guys.
together like yeah. So but when we were first together, I was young. I mean, right out of West Point, right out of flight school in 101st Airborne Division, which is like, one of the elite units of the Army.
Mhm.
My wife works in the pageant world. She's a hair and makeup artist and a photographer and a dress designer in the pageant world. And she was like, listen, I mostly work on the weekends. So if you want to hang out with me, you got to, you know, can come hang out at the pageants. So,
Yeah.
I started hanging out at pageants and I'd come back and people would be like, that's the weirdest thing, man. You're like the duality. You're
Yeah.
you're doing all this stuff in the military, and then on the weekends you go hang out with your wife and talk about, the way what pair of shoes you should wear at the dress. I was like,
Well,
I'm pretty
yin and yang.
I'm pretty wicked now though. I know some stuff now, especially after my daughter was Miss USA. My
Yeah.
wife keeps on telling me, she goes, "You need to be a judge." And I was like, "No, I don't want to judge
Yeah.
anybody. No, no, not for me."
And I was gonna ask, what are some things that you learned from being in the military and took into more corporate spaces? But now I think I kind
Mm,
of want to focus on what did you learn in
the
beauty
pageant world?
pageants and take them.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest. Well, I will say this just about the corporate military. If you would have asked me, years ago, um, like especially right out of school, like right out of West Point, right out of flight school, if you'd have said, "Hey, you'll be a better military officer if you took some time as a civilian," I would have
Mhm.
never believed it. I always tell everyone now I'm a much better Army officer now because I spent 10
Mhm.
years out and working in the corporate world.
Yeah.
One, I just understand there's just different ways. Like you can not get away with it, but there's a way that you can talk to people in the military that's much more
Mhm.
direct, much more. It's not like barking orders at people and all that. Everyone thinks that the military is so much like I'm going to tell you what to do every day. It's very much not that way, especially at the senior levels. It's not that way. Um,
Mhm.
but you can just be much more direct. Um, don't really care sometimes about what other people think. You know,
Yeah.
especially if you're a commander. I'm the commander. Everything that either we do or fail to do is on my shoulders. So it's like,
Mhm.
but once you're out in the civilian world, like, those kind of conversations don't fly that well. And,
Yeah.
it's much more, it has to be much more collaborative. Um, Especially with the young generation. I think I'm a better Army officer for the younger kids today because I've spent so much time in corporate world.
Mhm.
And just there's a business side that, and I don't ding on military guy. I talk to them about it quite honestly when, especially when they're thinking about getting out,
Mhm.
retiring or getting out. It's like you don't understand the business world really.
Mhm.
It's different than, and if you need a program manager, military officers and senior NCOs and stuff, they make phenomenal program managers
Mhm.
because it's like, I need you to manage this budget to zero. I need you to manage your people, make sure everything's met for your clients. They're great program managers.
Yeah.
But from a revenue business development side, it's like, guys, you're used to like giving a budget, like, hey, here's your $10 million. It needs to be zero by October
Yeah.
1st. I'm the other
Mhm.
way around. Here's zero. I need it to be $10 million by October 1st. You
Yeah.
know, and they're not used. They've never been put in those roles where all of a sudden you have to make money, and the kind of interactions and the
Yeah.
and the the kind of give and take. Because everyone who's in the business development world knows you don't always get what you want, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to give some stuff up to get stuff on the back end, and it might be a long term, like, well, if we do this now for no profit, we'll be on this team later, and we can get much better profit down the road.
Mhm.
That's not how you think if you're like a military officer, program manager who gets a budget every year, and you just manage that to zero. And you have to, because if you never, and that's the other thing, you have to spend your money because if you don't spend all your money, shoot all your bullets, do whatever
Mhm.
for training, you won't get them the next year.
Yeah.
That's one of the quirky things about the way we there's no incentive for saying, well,
Mhm.
you gave me 1,000,000 bullets to train my unit. I only needed 500,000 of them, and we're still trained.
Mhm.
So I'm going to turn in these other 500,000, and I get credit for it down the road for being
Yeah.
being financially responsible. And I always get a lot of times you'll hear guys that are senior military officers say, well, we're great stewards of the government's money or of the people, taxpayers' money.
Mhm.
Well, you are if that means you're spending it to zero. That is,
If you spend
you know,
all of it.
that's totally different than me in the corporate world. In the corporate world,
Yeah.
if I'm a good steward, then it's like, well, I'm going to cut some corners here. We're not going to take this trip because we could save ten or $15,000 on
Mhm.
travel by doing it a different way or having this meeting in a different forum. And we all get rewarded for that because that goes into our bottom line. If we save some
Mhm.
money, well, then we get to dole that out as bonuses or something like that.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's different. And so I always tell folks, being in the civilian corporate world has helped me understand, be a much better Army officer.
Mhm.
Uh, Same way, being an Army officer has made me a much better leader in the corporate world
Yeah.
because you're willing to make decisions. You're willing to do things that maybe if you've never had a leadership training, that's what I was like. A lot of people are thrown into leadership, but they've never been
Yeah.
trained on how to do certain things.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that's one of the things that I think that it's been kind of a neat duality with me. I never regret the fact that I got out for 10 years. And I'm not a full time. I'm just a National Guard person. The classic, they call it an M-Day soldier. Like
Mhm.
it's 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year,
Yeah.
and then most of my time is spent in the corporate world.
Mhm.
So it's been fun. It's been a neat like learning experience.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting. So the way they handle the budgets, so you get like how you said it in bullets, you get 1,000,000 bullets. This whether it's quarter or whatever
Yep.
the budget time frame is, and then you only needed it during this quarter. You only needed 500,000. So then they think, okay, they only need 500,000, so they only give you 500,000 next time.
Yeah.
But
That's
it's the
exactly how it works.
500,000 doesn't add to the 500,000. Now you have a million. You just have,
Mm-mm.
and then something
No.
changes, whether it's you have more units or the
Yeah.
could say market environment or political environment has changed, and then now you need a million, and now you need to ask for more money, and they don't like that.
Well, and so not so much in like if you actually went to war, because that's a different kind of budgeting
Yeah,
and who would give you your stuff. But let's just say just from a training perspective.
yeah,
And let's say you have a unit where um, like the Army loves threes and fives. So if you're in a brigade structure, you have 3 to 5 battalions underneath you, right?
hmm
Brigade commanders, like a colonel, battalion commanders would be like a lieutenant colonel. Um, they have to put in their budget every year for like, this is what it's going to take, to train my unit. If you're in the flying world, this many flying hours I need, all this kind of stuff. And all
Mhm,
that budgeting stuff goes push forward.
mhm,
They adjudicate that, and then here's your funding, right? And pretty much
mhm.
everybody gets the same thing. If you're like, if you're an infantry battalion and here's your sister infantry battalion that's structured the exact same way, you're both going to get the same stuff pretty much.
Yeah.
But what's weird, and this is where it gets quirky, say we're all together and then my unit figures out a way to do something better. Like I didn't
Yeah.
need all that ammunition. I didn't need all these flight hours. I was able to do it this way.
Mhm,
If I then come back to the boss and say, "Hey, I only needed this much. I'm going to turn it back in."
mhm.
There's a there's a part that and a mentality out there that still exists that somehow, well, he's setting himself up for failure next year because he's not going to get the same. Because the minute you
Mhm,
show him you don't need that much, well, that becomes your new standard for what you're going to get the next
mhm,
year. And now he's hurting everybody. And
mhm.
I think it really leads to problems. I think it leads to things like, well, it doesn't always. It can lead to like a fraud, waste, and abuse mentality, right? Whereas, like,
Mhm,
well,
mhm,
if I've been given all these things and I need to get rid of them,
mhm.
maybe we just need to shoot all of our ammunition next time we go to the range, whether we need to or not. That
Mhm.
kind of stuff, that mentality that thinks like to breathe that into people that like you should think that way instead of, man, if you can get this done, you can turn this in when it comes to evaluation time and I have to evaluate you as a
Yeah,
commander. I could say, hey, Zach was able to train his unit to standard and beyond with way fewer resources, right?
yeah.
I would look at that as another commander and say it took double. He needed someone to give him more resources to train his people. I'd look at that and
Mhm,
say, well, what's Zach doing? He's got something going on over there that he's able to
mhm.
figure it out. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's some of the things that, it's kind of up to military leaders to change that mentality of this, on their own.
Yeah.
Um, we talk about it a lot. That's where I think that some of the civilian experiences that I have help out because,
Mhm.
from a corporate perspective, I want to do the most we can with like the fewest expenditures, right? I don't want to
Yeah.
spend, and sometimes you got to spend money to make money, but at the same time, it's like let's be smart about it.
Yeah.
I remember when you and I used to work together before. When it came down to like whether or not I send my people to a trade show,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
some of these trade shows can be, even for a small company, can cost five to $10,000 when you look at
Yeah.
travel and all this, and getting a booth space and your registration fees and all that. Um, And I would tell people that work with me, is like, listen, you got to come back with like three actionable items. That's your
Mhm.
minimum, right? Your stretch is five, but you got to come back with three that actually we can follow up, do something about.
Yeah.
Because if not, then we're really not, we're just spending money to go out there and like hang out with other people in a conference, you know?
Mhm.
It's like, that's, it might be cool. And like, hey, I got to go to San Diego and hang out at a conference, but we just spent $15,000 and what do we get in return?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
that's a mentality from a corporate perspective, I think that's different than sometimes in the military leadership. And it's not, I think at the highest levels, they look at where can we save dollars, where do our expenditures need to be. But when
Mhm.
it boils down to like the ground level, you have a very small budget to deal with. You have a very small, it's like I got to train my guys with this much stuff.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to make sure it's all at zero by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Just, You know, I'm gonna make sure I get rid of all my ammo. We're gonna shoot everything. We're gonna fly all of our flying hours. We're gonna,
Mhm. Mhm.
so
Yeah, it's super interesting because I mean that's like one of the basic rules in developing like a business in the corporate, whether it's you're an SMB or you're a bigger company, is making sure that you're not just throwing your resources against the wall and hoping something sticks. Like everything has to be very coherent. Everything has to kind of play and feed into the leverage of the next coherent action and initiative. Which I'm sure that is how, like you said, how it looks in the from a 30,000 foot view from a higher level in the military. But it sounds like when you get kind of boots on the ground, more so, not literally boots on the ground, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
It's
no,
less so.
that's a great point. And I think where the difference is the military is quite wonderful at figuring out what it takes to do something, right? Like
Yeah.
there's all sorts of tables and analysis to say, hey, if I have an infantry soldier, he needs to shoot this many rounds at this many targets at this distance to be qualified to check a block and say he's qualified to do that. Same way in the
Mm,
flying world, you need to do this many iterations of this kind of landing, blah, 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 to say and then they can back that up. Well, that's going to take this many hours or this many bullets or this much. And at the end of the day, you can have this beautiful, they do a phenomenal job
yeah.
projecting what that's going to take,
Mhm,
but a lot of times there's some wiggle room in that, right? And it's
mhm,
it's the wiggle room where you could save things. The baseline you're always going to have to do. I
yeah.
mean, it is going to take us this many bullets to go train our guys to shoot this, or this many flying hours to fly this type of mission and be qualified
Mhm,
to do it. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like, have we over budgeted a little bit, right? And
yeah.
if we have, the risk you run then is like, say you're in the flying world, and the risk you run is, if I turn those hours back in and I could have let my people fly them and get
Mhm,
extra training, right? Is that difference in extra training that they'll get? Like, if we used to land in the dirt a lot in helicopters, they call it brownout
yeah.
landings, right? Where you really can't see anything, and it can be a quite emotional experience, especially when you're at night in a
Okay. Yeah,
formation with other
yeah.
helicopters. It can be tense. But it's a great event. You have to go out and train it, right? People are like, well, what do you do in the middle? Well, you go train, right? You train to go do
Mhm,
that, right?
mhm,
But if you say, well, listen, I have these extra flight hours, I'm going to turn them back. Or I
mm,
say, well, I have these extra flight hours, I could get my guys to do more brownout training.
mhm,
And then say one guy does the extra brownout training and everything's fine.
mhm,
Another unit decides to turn their hours back in, and something happens and someone, gets in an accident in a brownout landing.
mm,
Are they gonna look at you and say, "Dude, you had extra hours to train your guys, and why?" You know?
mm,
You could have
mhm,
spent those, you had the dollars. You could have
mhm,
said extra iterations. And so there's that kind of mentality too. It's like, if you gave me all this stuff, I'm gonna try, and you know what I mean?
yeah,
But
yeah,
again,
might as well use it.
it doesn't feel like it's your money sometimes though, right? It's just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Hey,
yeah.
here's my training budget." Right?
Mhm,
Okay, well, they just gave this to me. Here's my training budget. Let's use this up. Versus
mhm,
like when a small company like me, it's really me and my boss who make most of the decisions. And it's
yeah,
like, if we didn't go to these events, we'd have like $20,000 extra in our revenue pool. And, we could turn that
mhm.
into bonuses at the end of the year.
Well,
It's
yeah, well,
it's
that's what I'm.
ownership.
Yeah, like, so, like, to your point, okay, I don't use these hours, and then you're kinda thinking, "Okay, what if I use that? What have been the benefit if I used the extra 100 hours to train these individuals in these specific things?" But the decision, would the decision, maybe is this part of the decision that, okay, if I don't use up these resources here, I know these resources are gonna be allocated somewhere else just as important of an initiative over here, but it doesn't sound like that's the case, we just end up losing it.
Yeah, and that's you run the risk too of, and it depends what level you're at, right? I mean,
Yeah,
dollars always roll up to the next higher. So if you're at a
yeah,
company level, battalion level, you kick your dollars up or your resources up. Well, that might all go to like a division level headquarters or even beyond, and you might not ever see how those dollars are
yeah.
implemented. That someone's going
Mhm,
to use them for something. They always have
mhm,
this thing, at least in the Army. I think, yeah, all the services do it, but they might call it different things. But we have what's called a UFER list, an unfunded request list. So here's like every unit like puts in like, hey, if I had some extra money, and of course
mhm,
the military is great at like colors of money, right? It was like, you
yeah,
can only spend this type of dollars on this type of thing and these types of dollars on these types of things. But you put down and say, well, if I had some extra dollars, I would get this, this, and this. I would
yeah,
try and, or I would ask for extra whatever.
mhm,
And then at the end of the year, especially like this time of the year, because the military runs on a fiscal year, that is, end of September. You
oh,
really
that's
look
right.
at like, okay, we have some extra dollars, and then those
Mhm,
those lists all go up to the higher headquarters, and then they prioritize them. And it's like, okay,
yeah,
here's our top 100 on our UFOR list, and then they look at the end of the year and say, hey, we've got extra dollars, we can fund those top 5 priorities on our UFOR list. So sometimes there's that, that you can
mhm,
actually see, but usually those are dollars that are held at the higher level, kind of in
yeah,
reserve almost. Like, it's not that the
mhm,
units turned them in, it's that they were never given them to begin with. Those were kind of being
Gotcha.
held back in case there was an emergency and you needed some extra funding for something, you know? So it can be kind of a weird animal, and that's why I said, like, that's all, like, from a programmatic type thing. They're, great program managers to, deal with those budgets and figure out who needs what and where can we move dollars here. That's a
Yeah.
great programmatic thing, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it still doesn't, like, how did you get those dollars? That's my world.
Yeah.
Like, I need you to make
Yeah.
those dollars, right? I don't need you to program them. And we've got program managers and stuff, and they're great at what they do.
Mhm.
But I need guys that are like, how do I start with zero and turn that into, by the end of the year, the government is cutting you a purchase order and sending you a check to do
Yeah.
something for them. That's a different animal. And most
Yeah,
of the guys aren't, you know,
it's super interesting that because you see like whether it's like the Jockos or the Goggins and that kind of stuff, and they kind of glorify the going from military into corporate sort of thing. So it's really interesting to
mm,
hear the differences in mentality and the differences in not just mentality, but the differences how you identify, like how you strategize, like what is success to you, and just how different it looks.
well,
But yeah,
and
Adriana
it's
had to
hard.
go.
Yeah, no, it's great. I was just
Yeah.
reading Adrina's comment. So, yeah, it is. If you'd have told me that, Adrian, that I would have had that perspective, and I needed to basically get out to have it, I would have never believed it. And
Mm,
it's probably one of the. It's been such a big influence on like me as a military officer that when I was in war college, they just, they always talk about like what's in the realm of possibilities. If you could be
mhm,
king for a day, what would you change? And I always said, we have these things where you do like industry mixers where you might spend 6 months with industry and all that. That's a good start, but that's not the same. You know,
mhm,
my best part was actually getting out and doing something in the civilian world.
mhm,
Heck, one of my jobs, like I worked 100% commission in the financial world. And I had
mhm.
people that worked for me. I'd start every month minus 4,500.
Yeah.
And it's like I had to make $4,500 that month just to pay my bills and be zero. Then I had to figure out how
Mm,
I'm going to do. That was terrifying. From
yeah.
coming out of the military, where everything is like, every month you get a paycheck or every 15
Yeah.
days, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's a whole nother world, right? But
Yeah.
what
The
a great
ability to be
experience to learn.
yeah, huge. The ability to be creative under pressure is such a rare skill, because usually stress and that kind of stuff, the unknown, putting yourself in a box, it inhibits creativity. And then you're like, okay, how am I going to get out of this? Okay, I have to make $4,500 in sales just to break even. How am I going to, like, what strategies am I going to use? Am I just going to use the same old script? Not working. I got to figure something else out. And like
Right.
when we were working together at NIB, we were working as I didn't work at NIB, but I was working. We were working together,
Right.
and it was like you had to be you had very limited resources, and you had a smaller team.
Yep.
Communication wasn't that great. I'm not going to talk any more about that, but it's you had to be very creative, and it
Yeah.
seems like that's not necessarily flex as much
Well,
in some military roles.
you know what? You hit on something though that you have to be like. Sometimes you have to be boldly creative.
Yeah.
Of all the skill sets of people in the military that I've been around, especially your more, because the military always talks about, there's kind of go to war, tip of the spear type jobs, and well, most of the military is a lot of support stuff, right? It's like a big
Yeah.
corporation. There's
Yeah.
administrative roles and personnel and all sorts, logistics and all. That the whole piece has to work together to get the thing out the door. But
Mhm.
those guys that are tip of the spear guys, when you like the Jockos of the world and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and it amazingly creative under pressure,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's where, if you really want to see, that's what makes them good employees.
Yeah.
You just you have to work with them a little bit because they're not. I'm not asking you to be creative to kick down a door. I'm trying to get you to figure out like what's another way we could approach this client
Mhm.
and you know figure out what their pain points are. You know,
Mhm.
with some training, they can do it. They're amazingly good at it,
Mhm.
because soldiers have and it doesn't matter rank, from the
Mhm.
lowest enlisted soldiers and whatnot. Boy, if you just give them some room to figure things out and don't be
Mm,
overbearing on them, it's amazing what soldiers will come up with. Some of the most
mhm,
amazing things I've ever seen had just been because soldiers maybe just wanted to do their job easier. I'll never
mhm.
when I was back at Fort Campbell one time, this is forever ago, there's a part in a Black Hawk that if you follow by the book all the steps, it is one of the most painstaking, drawn out. I mean, we're talking like 9, 10 hours to do this work, right? And you're out there on the airfield. It's summer, and it's just hot as all get out, and you're out there 9 hours digging around to try and get this one part replaced.
Yeah,
And my guys came to me, they were young. We're talking like E4s in the military, so it's like from a rank perspective, it's pretty low rank, but you're probably pretty young people too. You're talking
yeah,
early 20s, maybe.
yeah.
Heck, maybe even younger. Some people come in as
Mhm,
E4s, um, and came to me and said, "Hey, sir, I think we figured something out." And
mm,
they showed how they worked with they didn't just do it on their own. They worked with the technical guys and technical inspectors who have to inspect the work.
yeah,
Say, "Hey, could we do it this way? If we did it this way instead of that way, is this legal? To
yeah.
skip these steps and do it a different way?" And they took a 9-hour job to turn it into a 2-hour job. Even even so much that, like, the people who wrote the technical manuals, because
Yeah,
most of your technical manual writers are, like, engineers somewhere that
yeah,
they've never had to, like, do it on an airfield somewhere when it's 105 outside or something,
yeah,
right? They're just
mhm,
like, "Hey, this is the steps you follow." They figured out a better way, and it ended up becoming like they sent a change order up to change the manual, like, you can do it an easier way.
mhm,
And, you know, talking kids that are 20 years old, 21, just let them figure it out. They're
yeah,
amazingly creative at what they do. So just let them
yeah,
give them a little breathing room.
yeah,
Problem is that most people are so overbearing on their guys that and gals that, they never get to see how creative they are because, it's my way or the highway sometimes, right?
yeah, yeah.
You
How
see
has
that
the how has
you see that corporately too,
Oh, you
right?
see it all the time. Oh my god.
You
How I
right.
was gonna ask you, how is the leadership, how is leadership and like, the ideology around leadership, how has that changed in the military over the last how many years? Because I've heard and I mean, reading that there has been some changes, recently,
Um, I guess I
semi-recently.
can well, and I have to be, I can speak to my experience, right? I can't
Yeah,
speak for
yeah,
the
yeah.
military, especially because 'cause I'm still in and all. I can't really speak to everything. What I
I mean,
can
like,
say is that,
like,
like
the ideology, not the specifics, but just the ideology
yeah.
around what makes leadership successful.
To be honest, I think it's still kind of the basics, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that hasn't really changed. What's changed is like the people receiving the message
Mm,
have changed a little bit. Younger
yeah.
soldiers and airmen and Marines that they're just a little different now than they were when I was a kid. But I think tell everyone like, listen, my first year at West Point was 1989. The Berlin Wall hadn't even come down yet, right?
Yeah.
We're still living in a world where it was very common for a parent to say, "Well, we're going to do it this way because I told you so," right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't even as a parent nowadays that doesn't really fly too well, right?
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, like, well, what flies in your house as a parent, right? if,
Mm.
if that doesn't work as a parent, well, guess what? When you have an 18 or 19-year-old soldier, probably still doesn't work that well, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I think the mentality is still from a leadership thing has changed. If there's anything that sometimes I think people want to be a little more informed, and I think that's
Mhm. Mhm.
partly. I think social media plays a big part in it.
Yeah.
There's just so much more readily available information,
Yeah.
um, that, it seems ridiculous to think this way, but I tell folks all the time, guys, I was a captain in the Army before I had a cell phone and internet. So my whole early days were there was no cell phone, there was no internet. You got an
Mhm.
operations order and you went with it. Nowadays, there's so much information. It's not hard for someone to like Google some information and say, well, that's not the right way to do this, or someone else does
Yeah.
it different. Oh, here's a video of someone doing it differently, right?
Mhm.
So if someone asks a question like why, or they want a little more info, I mean, I guess you can bow up. Some of my older compatriots, they're like, sometimes they want to push back on that. I'm like, well, I guess you could bow up because you can rank wise, you can bow up on someone and you can tell them, I would say you can tell them, hey, you're going to do it because I told you so, right?
Mhm.
And guess what? You're a high ranking person. It's gonna fly. I was like, "Did you like that when your father told you that?" And
Mhm.
not particularly. Well, do you think your soldiers like that? Right?
Mhm.
No one really likes to that as an answer, right? I don't like it
Yeah.
professionally in the corporate world. We're gonna do it my way, right?
Yeah.
I I had a
That
few
flies by some
bosses
well.
that way. I
Yeah.
did. I had a few like, "I want you to send me your emails before you send them out because I wanna read them, and I'm gonna change them, and then you can send them out." Mm, really? So, yeah, I swear to God. But, I think that the leadership itself hasn't changed. You
Yeah.
can always kind of fall back on the basics of, know yourself, seek self-improvement,
Yeah.
know your people and look out for their well-being. Those are always like they exist forever. It's how you apply them, I think that what's and the it's
Mhm.
like that message thing, right? There's a sender and a receiver and a message, and somehow I think the receiver is a little different. And because the receiver
Mhm.
wants to receive a message a little differently, you might have to tweak that message. The message
Yeah.
might have to be different, and that's okay.
Yeah.
The military is much more open than it used to be. I mean, heck, I was coming up in the days when "Don't ask, don't tell" was still a policy. It was a thing,
Mhm.
and nowadays it's anything but.
Yeah.
It's totally different. And what's crazy is that there were so many people that were like, "Oh, it's gonna be so different." And has it really changed anything? No. It's just if anything, there's probably people that feel more included in what we do.
Yeah.
Before
No,
there
that's
was a
super
lot of people.
interesting.
I would guess, and I wish,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't be able to find the demographics on this, but have the demographics changed since the early '90s to
Mhm.
now? Probably not. It's just,
Yeah.
do you know about the demographic, right? And
Mhm.
so, you know, if you came up under some system that you basically made you hide the demographics of,
Mhm.
did that mean that demographic didn't exist? Absolutely not. And to
Yeah.
be honest, it's almost not laughable, but everyone's like, "Well, what do you think? How have things changed? And have you seen all these problems?" No, I haven't. My experience is that it's not been any problem at all since some of the rules have changed. It
Yeah.
just
So
is,
it's
right, man?
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how we view. So we're comparing the data that we can now see, so things that we know, to things that we assumed, and then we're thinking that it's different, but it really
That
it's a lot more similar. So what you're saying is it's a lot more
I,
similar than we think. Just
I'll
what we
say
assumed
this:
is different than what we know.
I did I I was working on a master's degree in negotiations and conflict resolution, and one of my classes was on a gender-based conflict in the workplace, and I had to write a paper about it. And one of the biggest things I wanted to focus. This is right when there was discussion about changing "Don't ask, don't tell" policy,
Mhm.
and so I went to my professor and I said, "I want to write about this topic." And
Mhm.
my initial thesis, and again, I had only been back in the military. I'd been out for a decade. I'd only been back in a few, like 6 months or something. So I
Yeah.
was like, my gut feeling and is that you can change it, but you know, is it worth all the pain and suffering that'll go with it? Right. That was my initial thought. I spent about the next 2 months or so researching, and when you research topics, you can always find someone will say X. There's
Mhm.
another person that will take the opposite of X, right? And you can
Yeah.
kind of work your you know weighing those out. I spent about 2 months, and I could never find any study that was done that showed that changing something like the "Don't ask, don't tell" policy would be negative
Yeah.
on anything. And so they started comparing it. Everyone said, "Well, it's going to destroy cohesion and morale and blah 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 blah." And the only thing they could really compare it to was either like militaries that had changed, so like the British Army and like
Mhm.
Australian, and then some paramilitary organizations. So like fire departments, police departments, things like that that had
Mhm.
changed their policies. And what they found was just the opposite. That um, from a cohesion, and it was like there was more of a recognition that this person is part of our team and part of our family.
Yeah.
So, we might give him a hard time, but no one else should. It's kind of like you give one of your own cousins a hard time and give him, because of whatever, and you give a cousin a hard time, but like nobody else better. Someone else better. This is my cousin, so I can say it, but no one else better
Yeah.
say it, right?
Mhm.
And that it was so different in the studies that I found that I actually had to go back and change my thesis to not only should it be changed, we probably should have changed it years ago, right?
Hmm.
And so it's that whole what we thought would happen versus it's not really,
Yeah.
And I would
Hmm.
say, it's like it's always like it was talked about. It's just a leadership challenge, right? If you got issues
Hmm.
inside your with your people and the what you would call your family, then that's a leadership challenge. You got to fix the problems, right?
Yeah. Well, let's say one of the biggest indicators of somebody who is a happy, feels more fulfilled, feels more bought into the work that they're doing is the idea of choice, and they can't have that choice if they don't actually know what they're doing. So even if they don't necessarily they know what they're doing, they're aware of it, they've asked questions, right? They're making now they feel more like they're making the choice to go and do it. Therefore, they're going to do it
Yeah.
more cohesively with the team. They're going to do it more
Yep.
abundantly, and so it's is that kind of the same concept of getting rid of that policy?
Absolutely. I think that a- and I don't know, again, this is for my own personal experience, but and so I can't speak for Air Force and Marines and all that, but I mean I've always kind of looked at like whether it's corporately or whether it's in the military that
Mhm.
the people I work with and the team I work with, they're like a family to me,
Yeah.
right? And as long as you think about them as like family, would the way you works for you, would you same way, right? If that
Mhm.
was your son or your daughter or your, whatever, would you treat them that way?
Yeah.
And if and because at the end of the day, it's not like there's some outside entity that's going to come in and tell you this, that, and the other thing is right and wrong. It's like this is it. This is the people to your left and right. This is who we have. This is our
Mhm.
team and this is our family. And if you treat them like a family, then whether and it's all about like kind of dignity and respect, right? Well, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
if it's in the workplace, in corporate America, in the military. It's about treating with somebody with I would treat my
Mhm.
own family member. And I think that's always where it kind of boils down to the basics of leadership, right? If
Yeah.
you internalize that like the people around us are a family and not just entities that you're leading or telling what to do.
Yeah.
Because most people have felt that in the corporate space. You work for a boss who's like completely impersonal, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't know anything about you, doesn't really care to know anything about you. You're there to punch a clock and do a specific task. And,
Yeah.
here's the standards and you meet those standards and the time you're supposed to be here and do your job,
Mhm.
versus someone who's, personable, knows about you, understands it. It gets into the whole like, I saw some feed on LinkedIn today where a guy said like, I'm so sick of hearing this in the workspace. And it said like, I need to leave early because my child's sick. Can I take the afternoon off because I need to take my wife somewhere? Blah 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 blah. He goes, I hired you to do a job, and I trust you to do a job. You don't need to ever tell me these things, you
Yeah.
know. And that's such a that's such a hard concept to deal with sometimes, right? But it's so easy, Just
Yeah. Yeah.
if you hire people and you trust them, like, do I don't really care if you have to go, if your son needs to go to the doctor, take him, because
Yeah. Mhm.
if I really see you as a family member, if you were my son or my daughter, I'd want you to go take care of my grandkids, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to take grandkids to the doctor, please do, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, even just from
We'll
a
catch up
practical
on work later.
yeah, if you have like even from a practical perspective, like how you have a mother or father at work with you, their kid is sick, and they know they're sick, they're worried about them. How productive are they going to be if they're worried about their kid all day? So something as simple as that. Also, even just
Yep.
from a you want numbers, you want data, just from a production standpoint, they're probably shouldn't be there anyways. It's just
At,
insane. This is going to be
absolutely.
a hard 90-degree turn, but we're
Okay.
almost an hour in, and what's some of the oddest, or what is one of the oddest job titles that you've ever seen, whether it's in the military or civilian?
Job titles. The one that actually is like a real job title, because there's some people like make up job titles sometimes, which I think are kind of funny.
Yeah.
Um, but like Scrum Master, like the heck is a and I'm not an IT guy, so every time I see it, I'm like, what is a Scrum Master? Right? I kind of know.
What?
I know the basics of what it is, but it's like, what a
Yeah,
great job title,
yeah.
Scrum Master.
Well, I think at some point, I don't know if it's how recently, but fairly recently in the grand scheme of things, it seemed like, again, in this new age of like whether it's millennials starting to take over or whatever it is, they started to realize, oh, like we can make out like job titles are just like we can make these up. Like the IRS doesn't care what their job
Right,
title is as long as they file the
right,
taxes, right?
right.
So they started making up some pretty odd job titles out there, and there was one that I saw. This isn't going to be part of our game that we're playing. This specific one isn't going to be part of the game that we're playing, but it was a CS Ninja Master, and it was basically, which is crazy, but this is like in a startup, right? Although they were just
Nice.
kind of, I think they were like phase three of their funding and that kind of thing. So they had a little bit of a team, but that's who they were hiring for, and the job
Well,
description was just
it's got to be
it,
great.
would- it was just a customer, it was just a customer service, but at the end of the day, it was just a customer service manager. It was just somebody to like come and, because the thing is, they want it like the huge part of a successful company is making sure that you're taking care of your customers, and then you're getting reviews, and you're creating proof, and you almost create like this shadowy organization of or process of capturing their good reviews and capturing their
Yeah.
experiences and that kind of stuff. So it was just like, excuse me, but that's what kind of that's what motivated this game, which is, so we're going to look at some odd job titles.
Awesome.
Some of them I didn't I tried to pick ones that were real that I could find descriptions for, not ones
Right.
that were just completely made up and
Okay.
ridiculous. Although
We
some of
try
them
to guess.
sound kind
We
of
try to
ridiculous.
guess what they're responsible
We're gonna try
for.
to guess what they are. We're gonna try to guess what they are. So we're playing a little game. It's called What Did They Do?
All right.
Anybody who's here, we got quite a few people on X again. What wants to jump in? What's a brand evangelist?
It's got to be something in marketing, right? I mean, some kind
Oh,
of
for
like
sure. What
promoting
does
something.
evangelist mean?
Well, like if I live in South Alabama, so if you go to some old timey, like if you're gonna go to a revival, they still have old tent revivals around down here pretty often.
Yeah, yeah,
And those, I always think of the people that are like the preachers in those tent revivals are evangelists, right? They're
yeah.
spreading the word, right?
That's what I think. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
it's somebody who's just like, is just somebody who just like, so a brand evangelist. So it's somebody who spreads the word of your brand. Technically, that's what you could give the job title of the guy who spins the sign on the corner by the stoplight,
right.
right?
Yeah, love that guy. And around tax time, they always wear like they'll find one that's wearing like the Statue of Liberty costume.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why, or Uncle Sam.
Yeah, so
With a
the
knife,
brand
yeah.
evangelist is the guy. So a brand evangelist wouldn't be the guy who's not wearing the suit, like
Mm-mm.
wearing the weird costume. No, it would be somebody who's willing to, especially if you're like in Vegas, it's hot out, you're wearing a
Right.
Statue of Liberty suit or a
I would say
Donald Duck
I would
suit.
say too that like if I was a brand evangelist, it's like being able to plug that in no matter what. You know, like something that seems to be completely unrelated to what you're doing. It's like, well, now would be a good time for a cup of our coffee. You know, it's like, wait, just be able to plug that in wherever you can get it in,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
they were just talking about like diapers or something like that. Like
yeah,
their
you
first
ever
kid.
thought
That'd
about
be a good
you ever
time.
thought about having a cup of our coffee while you're changing diapers? Like, actually, I hadn't. But
No, no, I have. That's actually the last thing I'm
the
thinking
last thing
about.
I was thinking about, but
Let's
now that you
see.
mention it,
Let's see what it actually is. So, brand evangelist is someone who passionately promotes and advocates for a brand, often working to create loyal communities of customers who spread the word about the brand's values, products. So it's basically, yeah, you're creating this. This guy's just creating a cult.
right, right.
Yeah, it's a cult creator, which,
Engaging in social media, community events, yeah,
yeah, it's a
content creator. I'll be honest, like that's the one thing that like the young kids of today and stuff, awesome content creators.
oh, they're
Wonderful.
so
I
good.
mean, I'm so terrible at, I mean, I'm just not a content guy. I mean, I'm not, and they're so good at it.
Mhm.
And being able to link things together, and I always get a kick out because there's some really smart and really funny people in the world. And being able
Mhm.
to watch how they'll tie one thing to another. It's so good.
Genius. Well, they have, like you said, they have, there's a free platforms all over the place for them to flex that creativity. They don't have to wait till it's 110 degrees out with a 9-hour manual in front of them and then trying to condense it down to two. They can do it
Yeah.
wherever, right? All
Yeah.
right, what's the next one? If it's gonna load, there we go. Chief Happy. I actually kind of like this one, but this is one. So a good friend of mine who's going to be on the show next week, I think, Ray Trevino. He has it on his LinkedIn that he's the Chief Happiness Officer. But what do they actually
Love
do?
it. Um,
Would this ever be a position in the military, Chief Happiness Officer?
yeah, you could.
No, you think so?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, everyone thinks the military is so like, "Arr," I laugh all the time in the military. I mean, that's
Oh,
my
I'm sure you
best.
do.
'Cause I always tell people the military is really about like moments of real intense stuff, and then a whole bunch of like practical jokes and fooling around
Yeah,
in
yeah.
preparation for the next thing that's like super
In
serious.
preparation.
I think there's tons of practical jokes. Like all the crazy practical jokes I've ever seen have all been military stuff, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
maybe you need a
but
promotion to the Chief Happiness Officer.
yeah, I don't think they'd like to use the word happiness though. They'd probably want to put something real like
Well, that's
professional
what I was
behind
wondering if they
it.
would use
Like
a specific title.
yeah, it would be. How do I think about it? It wouldn't be happiness, but it would be like
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that one for a minute. But
This is
it
like
would be
the
some.
this is like the HR person who like gives out star stickers all day. Like
Right.
just say, you did a good job, you did a good job, you're gonna do a good job. And
I
that's
don't even remember. I don't know if you remember when we were working together in a prior life. My boss was always he told us that everybody he was vice VP happy, and
oh yeah, yeah.
he he was always like no matter what this was and that was and this that and the other thing. It carried a bad connotation though when he got promoted up and all of a sudden had to be like now you're the chief operations officer,
Mm,
and you really
that's
aren't
not
Captain
helpful.
Happy anymore.
Yeah.
You you can't be Captain Happy when you're the COO. And
Yeah.
so,
No,
so
you can't.
and so it kind of came a like what happened to all the funny jokes you used to send out on Wednesday?
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. I would say I would even be surprised if chief happiness officer isn't an HR position. It's just
If it
someone who's
isn't,
like,
like,
yeah, like if it's just someone who is out and about that is like you know, it's kind of like the guy on a football sideline who like is there just to pump up the guys. You
yeah.
just had a
Yeah.
terrible play and you come off instead of getting yelled at, you're the one telling you like, hey, dude, you're really great. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's like this is like if the CEO had like a brother or sister that was just like so positive, but not like super intelligent, and they just
Yeah,
needed to give him a job. And they're like, come in, make everybody happy, tell some jokes, and do the
no,
thing.
but kind of reminds me. Have you ever seen the movie Elf?
Oh yeah, for sure.
When he
Yeah, he'd
when
be alpha.
when he tries to wear the suit and he tries to be all
Yeah,
serious, but he was still
yeah.
just like a goofball at heart. So he'd like walk
Well,
around the office and like, ooh, what does that do? It's like,
yeah, yeah. That's this is what Elf would do.
yeah,
This is
right.
not Ray. Ray, sorry if you're watching this. I know that's not what you do. But Chief Happiness Officer, this is literally has an acronym, is responsible for fostering a positive workplace culture and ensuring employee satisfaction will be. But isn't that just HR in some cases?
You know what? I take that a little bit differently. So I think HR is responsible for kind of establishing the boundaries of culture and things like that. Like, hey, this
Yeah.
is the culture we're trying, making sure that people are treating each other in a professional way.
Mm.
That's different than the person that walks around and tries to foster that culture,
Maybe this is like
right?
the yin and the yang of HR, like which
Yeah.
is like what you just described as one, and this is the other.
Well, again, and I hate to make sports references all the time, but if you think about like the head coach who's like,
Yeah.
whether it's a Belichick or someone like that who seems to be so stern all the time, or Nick
Mhm.
Saban at Alabama, but they
Mhm.
always had someone behind them that was still supporting the culture that the coach laid out and all this stuff. Like this is the vision of who we are. But man,
Mhm.
I'm really down in the dumps right here. I need someone to kind of pick me up and like help me out a little bit. That's this person.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
Oh,
bigger
this is the
picture,
guy
man.
that
Everything
comes.
everything's gonna
Mhm.
be cool.
Yeah.
You just dropped the ball in this $2 million acquisition. Don't worry about it. There's another one you got coming, right?
Yeah. This is the guy or the girl that comes in after you like have your review with HR, and you're like, "Don't worry, you got this."
Yeah, you can recover. It's no big deal.
Yeah, you're gonna do it. Okay, so it's
Yeah,
it's a
you're
function.
number 7 of 7. But don't worry
Yeah,
about it. You're gonna bounce back.
yeah, right. It's a function adjacent to HR. I got you. Okay, I think we
I did
got
see
some here.
I did see a military review one time that said, "I can see no national emergency so dire as to ever require the service of this officer." Yeah, that was their senior
That
rater
was his review.
evaluation.
That is brutal.
Well, if you knew what the person did, you'd be like, that was probably too. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and that was probably being politically
it
correct.
was still like it was still my. It was in my brother's organization. My brother called me. He goes, "You might need to come look at this." My brother's a military officer too, so
That's too funny. Innovation Sherpa.
love the word Sherpa. Um,
I do too. I do too.
yeah, just because you know if it if it's what I mean, a Sherpas, they're the folks that carry the load for all the folks
Yep.
climbing the big mountains,
Climbing the
right?
mountains.
I mean,
Yep.
there's a handful of climbers out there that are serious and practice as much as Sherpas, but for the most part, that when people pay 30 to $60,000 to go climb a big mountain,
Yeah.
a Sherpa is the one leading the way, pre-positioning all the oxygen for them, making sure the
Yeah.
ropes are tied. You know, so I
What's
don't
their
know. From
life?
an innovation and Sherpa, to me, almost don't sound like they mesh.
Not yeah, not really, right? This is like the yeah, no, this is it's the guy who like sets up and makes it possible and does the heavy lifting to allow the innovators
Yeah,
to be as creative as possible. So this is kind of like a water boy for innovators.
which is cool. I mean, because most people have been around it. You have some folks that are super creative, but
Mhm.
if they didn't have someone to, you know, make sure all the mundane stuff got done, they might not make it across the street. You know, so
Exactly. Yeah.
they might forget to go eat lunch, kind of thing. So you need sometimes people, especially the super talented, creative folks, or they're like artists. They're kind of
Yeah.
out there sometimes. They're
Yeah.
just they march to a different drummer. They just
Yeah.
and what's wonderful about it is that they do, because I always look at folks like that. My wife's somewhat creative, like, well, she's beyond creative, but boy, she thinks in a different way than I do, and that's what I love about her because she thinks
Mhm.
so differently than I do. I'm much
Yeah.
more of a kind of stair step. She's much
Mhm.
more of an artist, creative, you know, but
So
she
you're her
doesn't want to do
Sherpa.
exactly.
You're an
She doesn't
innovation
want to do
Sherpa.
this. Yeah, I might
Yeah.
be. She'll come up with
Yeah.
an idea, and then it's like, okay, can you figure out how to make that work? You know?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, that sounds like you might be an innovation Sherpa, but let's find out.
Let
An
me see.
innovation Sherpa guides teams or companies through the process of innovation, helping them navigate challenges and identify new opportunities for growth and development. I mean, the way that's explained, I mean, that's the CEO. In some kind, depends on the company, but that's like the founder helps them navigate challenges. That's what
But I do like it though on the key responsibilities, like the leading brainstorming sessions, because
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of times the people coming up with the great ideas aren't the guy writing it on the whiteboard, right?
Oh no. Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
someone else is up there facilitating is a great, as a facilitator, and let the really creative people just, do what they do.
I think this is I can you know what this is actually kind of me. On our
Yeah,
team
right.
because we have people on our team that are a lot smarter than me, and I just sit back and ask questions. A lot of times, and just try to get it out of them. So I feel like maybe that's you
It's
know
kind
what?
of
I'm
like
gonna change my title. I'm gonna go on
yeah,
LinkedIn right now.
right now, innovation Sherpa. It's kind of like what late night talk show hosts do. You know,
Exactly.
they kind
Like
of lead the
facilitators.
discussion and let people kind of talk creatively. Oh, see, there's a dog attacking me right now. Um, and that's I think very much what a lot of the talk show hosts do. It's what make
Mhm.
folks so good at being.
Well,
And there
good
are people that are
podcasters.
and there are people that are phenomenal at it, right? The way they ask
Yeah,
questions, the way they, it's great.
they facilitate an innovation facilitator. But I think innovation Sherpa. That's just I don't know. I like it has a good ring to it.
Very cool.
Happiness hero, not to be confused with chief happiness officer. I made sure these weren't the same.
Happiness hero. The hero is an interesting word, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
a hero. Um, wow.
Immediately, and
Uh,
I know, so I know the answer to this one because I wanted to make sure because I thought it was kind of ridiculous. I wanted to make sure it wasn't the same as CHO, chief
yeah,
happiness officer. But the hero immediately, the hero made me think it's just when things are like they had to do a bunch of layoffs, right? And like we needed somebody like a dire situation. We need somebody in there right now. Like we need a you know what I mean? Like something that
yeah.
just pulled the morale down so bad. they had to come in and like save the day. That's what I initially thought.
I don't know. Maybe it's a great title, but I don't know I'm trying to think what someone like that would do.
Imagine you're at a bar. You're a single guy. You're at a bar and you're going on a date, right? Like whether you a blind date, met him on Tinder, whatever. And she's like, "So what do you do?" I'm a happiness hero for Amazon.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Anytime a
What,
hero, it makes it sound like you got to be a champion of something, right?
yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
you have to be the chief spokesman of why everything is great, right? Whether it's your brand or
Ah.
whatever, like you are like,
Mm,
this is why we're so good at this, right? Yeah,
yeah.
this is why we're leading the way on this,
Do you
and
think it's more about
why.
spreading the word of why everything's awesome?
Yeah,
Because the word hero initially made me think like like heroes come in when things are bad.
well, yeah, and then for me, like a hero also isn't really most of the folks that truly what I would consider would be heroes aren't really looking for it. They're not trying to make, it.
Yeah.
They just it just happens that
Mhm.
they are that way. So maybe they're not really the people out there talking. I don't know. It's a great it's a great thing to have on a business card just because it's going to generate discussion, right?
Disgusting. Yeah. If I was in
You know,
sales, this is what I would have on my card
Absolutely.
because it
Well,
would
you
generate.
remember, I always thought it was funny. Like I have my title on my card now just because I have to go to a lot of meetings with, founders and
Yeah.
CEOs and stuff. So you don't want to have nothing. But remember when I was at my past job, I had nothing on my business card. It was
Yeah.
just
You
my
didn't have.
name and phone number because
Mhm.
I always, the minute someone saw it, like, well, what do you do there? And then we had a
Mhm.
discussion because, well, funny I should ask because I do this and this, and then I sometimes do this, and
Yeah.
this would be
Yeah.
the same
Which is
kind of
smart
thing of
because
like,
I mean some people will see titles and then they make up their own stories of what those are based on their past experiences or their biases or whatever it is. So you kind of allow it not just inciting the conversation, but now you have control over kind of the narrative
my
based on the
my
person.
worst my worst thing is seeing people's titles that that they just fought for a title, especially it's from a big corporation and stuff. Like part of the job title was part of their negotiation or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I saw one the other day that was like Executive Vice President of International Business Development. I'm like, wow, that's quite a title for a big corporation. And then I'm thinking, didn't you just retire from the military? What do you know about business development internationally? So, unless
Yeah.
you're trying to sell your widget to a foreign country, I guess that makes you that title. It's like that's really not a good title unless you're just
Yeah,
trying to like. It's really you're really thinking you're more than you are, man. It's like you've
yeah,
never even
those types of
dabbled in it.
titles. Yeah, those types of titles. I mean, I just see salesman, salesperson, whatever when I see that type
Right,
of thing. Like,
rather
okay,
than
you have
knowing.
a client. Yeah, you have a client that's in Mexico. Cool. Like,
Right, great,
whatever.
right.
But what
And
is a happiness hero?
let's see.
Similar to a chief happiness officer, but often at a more hands-on or customer-facing level. Happiness hero works to ensure that customers and our employees have a
Ah,
positive experience and feel valued. So it's a customer service rep, providing exceptional
the
customer service.
customer service stuff is interesting because that's one I hadn't. There's not a lot of customer service in the military, and even in my
Yeah.
job, I mean, I'm a government contractor. We don't really do. I guess we do a little bit because the government's our customer, but
Mhm.
our PMs are so tied to like with the customer that
Yeah.
I guess sometimes when you have to hop in and fix things, that makes me the I think we talked about this in my last job too, that I was like, part of what we should be doing is because we had all those sub companies,
Yeah.
and when they would get upset, I was like, we need to have a fixer go in there and like make things right. I was like, that's
Yeah.
really that really is kind of this role,
You
customer
should have hired a
facing.
happiness hero.
They could have,
You should have
they
hired a
could have.
happiness hero.
Yeah, they let me go. No, I was kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what this is. Like it's like a fixer,
Yeah,
like a customer service SWAT team, SWAT individual that just comes in and
cool role.
just smiles. Yeah, just super
But
cool.
it would definitely it takes the right kind of person to do that,
Oh my god, especially if you're in a type of business where you're working with like a wide variety of clients and especially if you're
Yeah.
international.
There's
Like
only a
one
handful
day
of
you have to
people
be
who
a
can be
happiness
fixers.
hero in Japan, then the next you have to be in like, I don't know, Delaware. Like it would just be
Delaware.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it takes a different kind of person to really be a fixer and to
Yeah.
understand because there's so much, especially in the corporate world. I guess it's anything, but there's an emotional side to why people
Mhm.
are upset with your organization, upset with decisions that were made. You've got to be able to kind of tune into that emotionally as well
Mhm.
as okay, bottom line, how can we fix this from a corporate perspective or what can we do for you differently and there's very few
Mhm.
people that can not so much do it but feel comfortable in that role. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
a lot of those
Takes a
roles just
hero.
kind of they evolve, right? You
Mhm.
don't get really
Yeah.
hired to do that because you're not going to pick someone up from the street and be like, "Oh, this guy's." You're not going to figure it out in an interview.
Yeah.
It's the kind of guy who uh, say you have a person in your company that just kind of all of a sudden always seems to be having those kind of discussions, and
Mhm.
you say, "Well, I think we need to make her the fixer because she
Yeah.
seems to be the one who's always, let's change her role a little bit." You
Yeah.
know, um,
It would take a definitely take a hero to do that, and it probably mostly, I mean, I think probably women would probably be a lot better at that role as well. Like, probably most happiness heroes would probably be women. Empathy would be such a huge. I think there's more. I think if there's 100 of them, like 60 of them, I'm just saying more often than not, probably, because empathy would have to be such, and like listening, letting people just complain.
yeah,
I think that women would probably have way more patience with that. Do you think?
I don't know. I'll be honest. Sometimes I don't think in terms of. So that's an interesting point. I don't know. Would they or not? Maybe. Um, Definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't say that. From an empathy perspective. I don't know. I will always look at that like I don't really make that as a. I never want to put like a label on someone. Like, well, I would expect you to be more of this because of that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, I don't know, but you're probably right. You'd probably see more people that are more comfortable having those types of discussions, and
Yeah. Thicker skin,
there
like,
is and there is
feeling.
a sometimes there's a and it's not from a parenting perspective. I think a lot of times you see that from parents. You're going
Yeah.
to see more of a nurturing, being able to listen. You know, so there's just some parents that are better at it than others, whether
Oh, yeah,
it's
big time.
your dad or your mom. Sometimes dads are better at it than moms.
Mhm,
Sometimes moms are better at it than dads. But
mhm.
there is that nurturing, being able to listen, hear some. Then what do we do with it once you hear it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's cool. I mean, I'd love to look at the demographics of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's what
I'm
I
always
was thinking
curious
too.
about
Like, I was
that.
wondering, like, and also it's not just like that either, but also like what would there, because like you made a good point. This wouldn't be a role, like I'm not hiring a happiness hero. It's somebody who is already here, shows a great resolve and skill in that particular creating that outcome. Let's move them into that role. What was that role that they were initially in? Like what, you see
Right.
what I mean? Like what what
Yep.
fostered that skill? But what's a digital prophet?
Whew. Um,
This is the last one.
I love these things like prophet and evangelist. um,
Sherpa.
Sherpa. This digital could be anything nowadays. I guess I'm thinking, I always kind of go towards like social media, AI, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And then the prophet is
It's like somebody who identifies like software trends or
y-
uh
but gets to other people to try and conform and adapt to them, right?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I can be a champion for AI, but if I'm a prophet, then I'm trying to like, hey, if you did it this way, you'd be better at this, right?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
giving you some ideas of how to do things better. That's what I
Mm,
mean. So if I would think of some of the great prophets of the world, I would like, they weren't just saying it; they were trying to like, hey, you should do this too,
mm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
giving you.
yeah,
I'm not saying you have to, but I'm saying I'm going to give you some reasons why if you did it this way, it
yeah.
might be better for you in the long run, right? Um, so
So this is like somebody who's trying to get people to adopt to like a
Right.
new software, social
Or
media
maybe, hey,
platform strategy.
maybe you're using AI to, some sort of AI tool to help your emails or something like, hey, I use this to do emails better.
Mhm.
And, this is why I think everybody in my group or my company or whatever should be doing it too. We write
So
better,
they
whatever.
got it. So if you're like in a company where you're the demographic of your employees, they're a little bit older, all of a sudden they're like, okay, guys, we can't be writing stuff down on notepads anymore. We need a CRM. We need a digital prophet to come in and show them the ways of the HubSpot.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me preach my CRM goodness to you guys.
Yeah,
Not saying you have
this
to
is
follow
the
it, just saying that if you did, there's probably some reward for you here down the road.
yeah, this is Salesforce definitely hired a digital prophet for.
Right.
Predict future trends in technology and digital media, helping companies stay ahead of the curve by anticipating
Mm.
shifts in consumer behavior and emerging technologies. Key
Ah,
responsibility: researching and forecasting digital trends, advising on digital strategy, speaking at industry events. So they're like, okay, so speaking at industry events, so getting people bought in. Yeah,
yep. Guiding
yeah. So
companies
yeah,
on adopting new digital tools. Right.
I think that we're right on par there. But what would that this like realistically more often than not, what would this role be called? It's like your C
Innovation,
what,
maybe innovation officer,
yeah,
like
yeah, exactly, or
chief
like
chief
CPO.
innovation officer, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chief something like that. Like the digital prop again, this is one of those ones where it's like,
Digital
okay,
profit.
yeah, this is like a startup with like 20 something year olds who
I
love
think it's
they're
awesome.
definitely Star Wars fans.
You know,
And
I think I was way more structured in the past. Like, man, I'm very rigid. Like, this is the way. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, I think it's great. Maybe it's
I
because
love it.
my kids are, my daughter's 27 this year, and they just think a little differently. And if that's what motivates you to come to work or do your job, and awesome, go for it.
Yeah,
I don't. If that's what you want to call yourself, the digital prophet, awesome. Be the best digital prophet you can. Right.
let's go. No,
Tell me what that tell me what that means, and then, maybe let me
yeah,
tweak
I
it a
love
little
it.
bit.
Yeah, I love
I
it.
love it.
Well, and also, I mean, like title, I think to some people titles are important too, and then some titles, I think the connotation between some titles is very limiting. And in some of these roles, like a lot of these roles, it takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of outside of the box sort of thinking. So to not be bound by the old labels of this is what a chief innovation officer traditionally has done. No, I'm a digital prophet. Like
Yeah,
that's much more. Now I can just make shit up as I go. I can be much more creative,
right?
and I'll be much more
Well,
motivated.
I think there's part of that too that, in any corporation or any organization, military is no different. I think that's one of the things that we need to do, like foster more. You don't be bound by your title, right? If
Yeah.
if you're, a salesperson, or if you're this, to me, if you want to like really stand out, like don't somehow let that put you in a box, right? Well, this
Mhm.
is what I do, right? And I only do this. There are some people that are but there are some people personality wise that are very comfortable with that. Like, I
Yeah.
want to be in a box. I'm comfortable that. Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that box should define everybody, right?
Yeah.
I gave you this title. That doesn't mean you can't be out there when you're doing your job. Like, hey, I think I found a better way to do X, Y, and Z, and it will affect everybody in the company. Um,
Mhm.
we always push that, and from the military perspective, there's just because you're a machine gunner, right? And I'm a machine gunner in an infantry squad. That doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
can't, when you're seeing things like, hey, I think there's a better way to do this, boss. We
Mhm.
we set up this tent wrong every time.
Yeah.
You're not gonna
Well,
let the tent guys figure it out, right?
and if you don't foster that, like the amount of blind spots you're creating are really limitless. Like if you don't allow
Yeah.
people to think outside of there, because there's so many different perspectives that I don't know much about the military, but I'm sure a machine gunner has a different perspective than a sniper, and
Right.
if they
Absolutely.
collaborated, they could probably make a much better decision if they just had the one perspective, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
the world is, and it's interesting. The world's moving really quickly, but it's also like things are moving really quickly, but they're not. I don't think they're moving as quickly as we. I think that's a lot of times that's an excuse in some ways for people not to stay consistent
Yeah.
sometimes. But the world is moving fairly quickly, and it definitely takes, like, especially when you're on a team, that collaborative working together. We're all here to achieve this one thing, this one mission, and row in the same direction. Like, you'd be cutting off all your limbs if you didn't open up conversations and didn't have, healthy candor and allow people to challenge each other, even if they are, from different perspectives. Okay, we're having a sales strategy meeting. Why is the HR person talking? Well, they have a different perspective. They have perspective. They have a more full breadth perspective that they can bring to the table, sort of thing. If you don't allow that, and you keep people bound by their traditional, job description titles,
we've started doing that in my organization, where we bring in diverse groups for like my BD meetings. And I wasn't sure how it would go at first, but sometimes sometimes it's very quiet. They don't like that. Just nothing else. Like, hey, it's neat to see where the company's trying to go, and they appreciate that and feel more part of the team. Of like, hey, I get where we're going. But boy, I've had some great questions from folks that, well, why would we do this instead of that? And it makes you really think, like, well, that is a great question. And even if you know the answer, the simple fact that you have to kind of take someone through that, there's great value in that, because now that person feels like part of the decision. It's like, oh, I get why our company's doing it that way now, And I would have never gotten that had we not brought in a program manager from a totally separate program, or one of our, HR people that, just to listen in. So
it's key. And everybody needs to hire more chief happiness officers, more happiness heroes, more innovation Sherpas, more digital prophets. All right. But
all right,
we ended up talking for quite a while. I really appreciate you, Steve.
Yeah, man.
I'm gonna cut this one up and put her on YouTube, because this one, or put the actual game part on YouTube, because I think we got a lot of good stuff from there. But I really appreciate you coming on, and everybody on X and YouTube, thank you for sticking around. I really, really appreciate you. And Steve, where can everybody, where's be the best place for everybody to find you if they have some questions about some of the topics and stuff that came up today?
Yeah, I could give you my email address. Probably the easiest way. Like
Cool.
my personal.
All right, I'll put her in the link in the description. He answers fairly quickly on LinkedIn too. I'll put his LinkedIn down there as well.
Absolutely, reach out on LinkedIn if you want to. I mean, that want to connect and all that. I try and respond as fast as possible. Usually within a day, I try and respond. It's kind of my goal.
He's pretty good, especially when he needs to get the link to come into a live show.
But dude, if you would just known, I mean, some craziness ensued, and I had to take my wife to her job. So I didn't get home until 5:30 this morning. So I had to drive like 8 hours. I had to drive 8 hours unexpectedly yesterday. So there's a minute I thought I might miss it. I was like, I thought I might miss it. I was like, I gotta wake up.
You absolutely crushed it. No, and I really appreciate that, Steve, and I'm sure everybody else does. But no, it's great to be able to have a longer form chat with you. We haven't in I guess a few years now, really. So I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate you. And you might actually, when we do so like I said at the beginning of the show, we have our Young Professionals Leadership Summit in Toronto on October 19th. We are going to be doing another one. We are going to be actually putting on another event, whether it is a YPLS event or not, we don't know. But we do know that Steve might be joining us on stage. So we're very excited to be able to have him as part of that crew, potentially. So you'll be seeing more of Steve. So again, Steve, I really, really appreciate you. It was great to have a conversation with you again. But everybody here, until next time, keep chasing your next summit.
Thanks, y'all.